Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you something. Do you know what it feels like to walk with God? To have his presence beside you, guiding every step, every decision, and every move you make? I'm not talking about some abstract idea or something that sounds good in church. No. I'm talking about a real living connection. A walk that transforms you from the inside out. You see, in life, we face challenges that will break us, situations that will test our strength. But when you walk with God, there is no obstacle too great, no valley too deep. He will carry you, He will light your path, and with Him you will rise higher than you ever imagined. Faith is the foundation upon which everything in life is built. It's the first step we take when we decide to walk with God, and it's the core that holds us steady when everything around us seems unstable. We all face times in life where we're unsure of the next move, where doubt creeps in and fear tries to take hold of us. But faith, true faith, is what allows us to take that step forward, even when we can't see the whole path ahead of us. Walking with God requires faith because walking with Him isn't always about knowing every step of the journey. It's not about having a clear blueprint for our lives or understanding exactly what's coming next. Instead, it's about trusting that God's plan is bigger and better than anything we could ever imagine. It's about surrendering to the belief that despite the challenges we face, God is always with us, guiding us and making a way where there seems to be no way. Faith allows us to see beyond the circumstances and to look towards the promises that God has for us. It gives us the strength to move forward, even when we feel weak or inadequate. When we are walking with God, we trust that He is our protector, our provider, and our healer. It's a trust that goes beyond our understanding because His ways are higher than ours and His plans are greater than anything we could ever conceive. We often want to control the outcomes of our lives, but faith teaches us to let go of that need for control and surrender to His will. There will be times when life doesn't make sense, when nothing seems to be going right, when we feel lost or confused. It's in those moments when the storm is raging around us that our faith is tested. But it is also in those moments that our faith has the power to carry us through. When we don't know what to do, faith gives us the courage to keep moving forward, one step at a time. It might not always be a giant leap, but even the smallest step forward is an act of faith. Faith is not about avoiding challenges or hardships. It's about knowing that God is with us through them all. It's about recognizing that every trial we face is an opportunity for growth, for strength, and for transformation. God doesn't promise that life will always be easy, but He does promise that He will never leave us nor forsake us. With faith, we walk knowing that He is our constant companion, even when the path ahead feels uncertain. When we walk with God in faith, we also learn to trust in His timing. We might have our own plans, our own idea of when things should happen, but faith teaches us that God's timing is perfect. He sees the bigger picture and knows what we need and when we need it. Sometimes we have to wait for His timing to unfold, and that waiting can be hard. But faith tells us that it's in the waiting that we grow, that we learn patience, that we develop character. Faith helps us to trust that God is preparing us for what's ahead, and that everything in His time will come to pass. Faith isn't just about believing that God exists. It's about believing in His power, in His promises, and in His ability to work all things together for our good. When we truly walk with God in faith, we are acknowledging that He is in control and that His plans for our lives are greater than anything we could ever imagine. This trust is a choice, a decision we make every day to rely on Him, not on ourselves. Walking with God in faith also means stepping out of our comfort zones. It means taking risks and trusting that He will provide the strength and the wisdom to handle whatever comes our way. Faith is not about playing it safe. It's about stepping into the unknown with the assurance that God is leading the way. It's about embracing the challenges that come with growth and trusting that even when we stumble, God is there to catch us. Faith is not a one-time decision. It's a daily choice to trust God with our lives, to believe in his promises, and to rely on his strength. The more we walk with God in faith, the stronger our faith becomes. It's like a muscle that gets stronger the more we exercise it. Each step we take in faith, no matter how small, builds our confidence in God and deepens our relationship with him. When we walk with God in faith, we are not walking alone. We are walking with the creator of the universe, the one who knows our hearts, our struggles, and our desires. He knows the end from the beginning, and he is leading us to a place of purpose, peace, and fulfillment. Our faith in him is not just about trusting that he will deliver us from our struggles, but that he will walk with us through them. And that is the greatest gift of all. Trusting God's timing is one of the most fundamental aspects of walking with him. We live in a world that thrives on instant gratification, where everything is expected to happen quickly. We want our answers now, our prayers answered in our time, and our desires fulfilled immediately. But God's timing doesn't work the way we think it should. It often feels slow, sometimes even non-existent, and it's easy to become frustrated or confused. Yet, this is where true trust begins, to surrender to his perfect timing, understanding that his plan unfolds when it is meant to and not according to our limited sense of urgency. It's easy to trust in God's timing when things are going well, when life seems to be falling into place just as we envisioned it. But when we face hardship, when things take longer than expected or feel like they're falling apart, trusting becomes much more difficult. Yet, it's in these moments that our faith is refined. When the doors seem closed, when the road ahead is unclear, we are reminded that God sees what we cannot see. He knows the end from the beginning, and he knows exactly what we need and when we need it. God's timing is perfect, even when it doesn't make sense to us. His ways are higher than ours, and his understanding far exceeds ours. There are times when we may not understand why things aren't happening the way we think they should, and it can feel like we're in a waiting game. But God's timing is never arbitrary. It is always intentional. He knows when we are ready, when the situation is right, and when we have developed the strength or wisdom needed to handle what he is about to bring into our lives. Trusting in his timing means accepting that he knows us better than we know ourselves. He knows the desires of our hearts, and he knows when they are aligned with his will for us. Waiting can be difficult, but it's important to remember that God is never idle in our waiting periods. Just because we can't see immediate results doesn't mean that God is not working behind the scenes. In fact, he may be using this time to prepare us, to mold us, and to strengthen us in ways that we may not even recognize at the moment. The delay we perceive may be exactly what we need to get ready for the greater purpose he has planned. Trusting in God's timing often requires patience, something that many of us struggle with, especially in a world that is accustomed to instant everything. The Bible is full of examples of people who had to trust in God's timing. Abraham, for example, was promised a son, but that promise didn't come to pass for many years. He had to wait for God's perfect timing, even though he was growing older and wondered if it would ever happen. God didn't forget his promise, and when the time was right, Isaac was born. The same is true for Joseph, who was given dreams of greatness, but had to endure years of hardship and betrayal before seeing those dreams fulfilled. Through all of their waiting, they had to trust that God was in control, even when it seemed like everything was going wrong. Their trust in God's timing ultimately led to the fulfillment of his promises. We too must trust that God has a plan for us, even when we don't understand the timing of the events unfolding in our lives. It's easy to get discouraged when things aren't happening the way we want, but the key is to keep moving forward in faith. When we trust that God is in control of the timing, we can rest in the assurance that he is not only working on our behalf, but is also preparing us for what's to come. This trust gives us the strength to keep going, even when things seem uncertain. God's timing also teaches us humility. It reminds us that we are not the ones in charge of our lives. We often want to force things to happen when we think they should, but trusting in God's timing requires surrender. It means releasing the desire to control the outcome and trusting that He is leading us in the right direction. We don't have to have everything figured out. We don't need to know the full picture. What we need to do is trust that God does and that He is faithful to fulfill His promises at just the right time. Trusting in God's timing helps us to grow in our relationship with Him. It deepens our faith and teaches us to rely on His wisdom, not our own understanding. We may not always get the answers we want right away, but we are promised that God is with us in the waiting. His timing, while often different from our own, is always perfect. It's during these waiting periods that our trust is refined, our patience is tested, and our hearts are aligned with His will. When we trust in God's timing, we are acknowledging that He is in control, and we are allowing Him to lead us on a path that is far greater than anything we could plan for ourselves. Trusting in God's timing is not just about waiting passively for things to happen. It's about living in expectation, knowing that He is working behind the scenes for our good. It's about holding on to the promise that He will bring everything to fruition in His perfect time. Trust doesn't mean we won't face challenges or uncertainties along the way. It means we choose to believe that God's timing is always for our benefit, even when we can't see it immediately. Through the waiting, we learn to trust Him more deeply, and our faith grows stronger, preparing us for what lies ahead. Overcoming doubts with God's guidance is one of the most powerful aspects of walking with Him. Doubt is a natural part of the human experience. At some point, we all face moments when we question our decisions, our abilities, or even the presence of God in our lives. These moments can feel overwhelming and leave us wondering if we are on the right path. However, when we choose to rely on God's guidance, we can overcome those doubts and move forward with confidence, knowing that He will lead us through even the most uncertain times. Doubt often arises when we face challenges that feel too big for us to handle. Whether it's a personal struggle, a difficult decision, or an uncertain future, it's easy to question whether we are capable of handling what's in front of us. We look at the situation through our limited understanding and wonder how things will work out. But the beauty of walking with God is that we do not have to rely on our own strength or wisdom. God, in His infinite wisdom, knows exactly what we need and when we need it. He sees the full picture, even when we can only see a small part of it. The key to overcoming doubt is to shift our focus from our circumstances. When we focus on our problems, it's easy to become discouraged. But when we remember that God has already promised to be with us, to provide for us, and to lead us, our doubts begin to fade. In the Bible, we are repeatedly reminded that God is our shepherd, our protector, and our guide. He promises that He will never leave us nor forsake us. This assurance helps to quiet our doubts because we know that we are not alone in our struggles. When we walk with God, we can trust that He will guide us every step of the way, no matter how uncertain the path may seem. It is also important to understand that doubt does not disqualify us from God's love or His plan for our lives. Even some of the greatest figures in the Bible experienced doubt. Moses doubted his ability to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Gideon questioned God's call on his life, and even Thomas, one of Jesus' closest disciples, doubted the resurrection until he saw the evidence for himself. Yet in each case, God didn't condemn their doubt. Instead, He patiently reassured them and gave them the guidance they needed to move forward. God is not afraid of our doubts. In fact, He welcomes them as an opportunity to draw closer to us and strengthen our faith. When we bring our doubts to God, He does not turn us away. Instead, He meets us where we are and offers the reassurance and guidance we need to move forward. God's guidance may come in many forms. It could be through his word, where we find promises that remind us of his faithfulness. It could be through prayer, where we seek his wisdom and listen for his voice. It could be through the counsel of others, as God often uses people in our lives to speak truth into our situations. And sometimes his guidance comes in quiet moments of reflection when we feel his peace and reassurance in our hearts. It's also important to note that overcoming doubt requires patience. Sometimes God's guidance does not come immediately. We may not receive the answers we want as quickly as we hope, and this can lead to more doubt and frustration. However, it is during these times of waiting that our faith is strengthened. Waiting on God is not a passive activity. It is an active choice to trust that he knows what is best for us. As we wait, we learn to rely more fully on his wisdom, not our own understanding. It's in the waiting that we learn to surrender our need for control and trust that God is working behind the scenes, preparing us for what lies ahead. Doubt can also be overcome by remembering past experiences where God has been faithful. When we look back at the times in our lives when God has led us through difficult situations, we are reminded that he has always been faithful. Our personal testimonies of God's provision, guidance, and faithfulness serve as powerful reminders that he is trustworthy. These reminders help us to push through doubt because we can see how he has worked in our lives before, and we trust that he will continue to do so in the future. Another powerful way to overcome doubt is by taking action in faith. It's easy to stay stuck in doubt when we are passive and inactive, waiting for all our questions to be answered before we move forward. But often, it is in the act of stepping out in faith, even when we don't have all the answers, that we begin to see God's guidance more clearly. God will not always give us the full picture right away, but he asks us to trust him enough to take the next step. When we move forward in obedience, even when we have doubts, we create space for God to reveal more of his plan to us. Each step of faith builds our confidence in God and helps to quiet the doubts that seek to hold us back. Overcoming doubt is not about never experiencing doubt again. It's about learning how to navigate those doubts with God's guidance. It's about recognizing that doubt is a natural part of the journey, but it doesn't have to define us or stop us from moving forward. As we walk with God, we learn to bring our doubts to him, to trust in his promises, and to rely on his guidance. Through this process, our faith grows stronger, and we become more confident in the truth that God is always with us, leading us, and helping us overcome any doubt that may come our way. Strength in adversity is one of the most profound aspects of walking with God. Life has a way of throwing challenges at us, moments where we feel as though the weight of the world is on our shoulders. Whether it's personal loss, financial hardship, health struggles, or relational difficulties, adversity comes in many forms. It can feel overwhelming, and in those moments, it's easy to question how we can continue, how we can endure, but it's precisely in those moments of hardship that the strength of walking with God becomes evident. When we rely on him, we find that we are capable of enduring more than we could ever imagine. Adversity tests our character. It exposes what's deep inside of us, the hidden fears, the insecurities, the weaknesses. But it also brings to light the depth of our faith and the strength that God gives us in our weakness. In our own strength, we might falter, but when we lean into God, we are reminded that his strength is made perfect in our weakness. This is a central truth of walking with God. When we face challenges, we do not do so alone. God is with us every step of the way, empowering us to face our trials with courage and perseverance. The Bible is full of examples of individuals who found strength in God during times of great adversity. Think of David, the shepherd boy who was chosen by God to be king, yet spent years on the run from King Saul, hiding in caves, fearing for his life. David's strength came from his trust in God's promise that he would one day be king. Despite the hardship, despite the uncertainty, David found strength in his relationship with God. In the midst of the storms, he learned to lean into God for comfort and guidance. And in doing so, he found the strength to endure. Similarly, Paul, the apostle, endured many hardships in his ministry: imprisonment, beatings, shipwrecks, and constant threats to his life. Yet he wrote some of the most powerful letters in the Bible, encouraging others to press on, to find strength in the Lord, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. Paul understood that strength in adversity does not come from our circumstances, but from the God who holds us in the palm of his hand. Paul himself said, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me," a declaration of the divine strength that comes when we walk with God in the midst of our struggles. Walking with God doesn't mean that we are exempt from suffering, but it means that we are equipped to endure it with a sense of purpose and hope. God doesn't promise a life free of pain, but he promises that we will never face adversity alone. In fact, he often uses our struggles to shape us, to mold our character, and to draw us closer to him. The process of enduring hardship with God's strength is what helps to refine our faith. It teaches us to rely less on our own understanding and more on God's will and timing. One of the most profound aspects of strength in adversity is the peace that God gives us, even in the midst of chaos. The world may be crumbling around us, and everything may seem uncertain, but when we walk with God, we can experience peace that transcends our circumstances. This peace doesn't mean that we won't feel the weight of the world pressing down on us, but it means that, despite the storm, we can rest in the assurance that God is in control. His peace guards our hearts and minds, giving us the clarity and strength to keep going, even when the road ahead is unclear. Strength in adversity also involves perseverance, the ability to keep moving forward even when the way seems impossible. It's easy to give up when things are hard, to throw in the towel and walk away. But walking with God teaches us the value of persistence. God's strength enables us to press on, to take one more step when we feel like we can't take another. It's in those moments of perseverance that we experience the transformative power of walking with God. The act of continuing, despite the pain, despite the uncertainty, is where we see God's power at work in our lives. God never promised that we wouldn't face adversity, but he did promise to be with us through it all. When we walk with him, we are not walking through our trials alone. He walks beside us, providing the strength we need to endure. Sometimes that strength comes in the form of a verse of scripture, a word of encouragement from a friend, or a quiet moment of prayer where we feel his presence surrounding us. Other times it may come in the form of renewed hope, a fresh perspective, or a sense of courage that enables us to face the next challenge head on. Strength in adversity also involves trusting that God is using our struggles for a greater purpose. The trials we face may not make sense to us at the moment, but we can trust that God has a plan and that he is working all things together for our good. The Apostle Paul reminds us that we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. This means that even in our toughest moments, we can have confidence that God is not only with us, but that he is using our adversity to prepare us for something greater. Our struggles may be painful, but they are not without purpose. They are shaping us, refining us, and preparing us for the future God has in store for us. There is a powerful truth that comes with walking through adversity with God. When we experience his strength in our weaknesses, we become a testimony to others of his faithfulness. Our struggles become an opportunity to glorify God and to share the hope that we have in him. People around us may see our struggles, but they will also see how God is sustaining us through them. Our endurance, our perseverance, and our strength in adversity become a powerful witness to the transforming power of God's presence in our lives. In the midst of adversity, when everything seems to be against us, we can hold fast to the truth that God is with us, strengthening us, and enabling us to persevere. Our trials may be difficult, but they are never in vain. When we walk with God, we discover that the strength we need to endure is not our own, but his. And it is in that strength that we are able to rise above our circumstances, overcome our challenges, and emerge stronger than we were before. Purpose driven by God's will is the foundation of a meaningful and fulfilling life. In a world where many people chase after success, wealth, fame, or personal achievements, it can be easy to lose sight of the deeper purpose for which we were created. We often measure our success based on the standards of the world, but true fulfillment comes when we align our purpose with God's will. Walking with God means seeking His guidance to understand what He has uniquely designed us to do and allowing Him to direct our steps according to His divine plan. Our purpose is not something we can define on our own. While we may have dreams, ambitions, and talents, it is God who knows the purpose He has for us even before we were born. The Bible teaches us that we were created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand, Ephesians 2:10. This reminds us that our lives are not random or accidental. God has a specific plan and purpose for each of us. It is only when we walk with Him, seeking His will in everything we do, that we can fully understand and fulfill the purpose He has for us. Living a purpose-driven life means seeking God's will above all else. It means aligning our desires, ambitions, and goals with His plan. Often this requires a shift in our thinking, because our own desires and goals may not always align with what God has in mind. Sometimes we may feel a pull towards something that feels right to us, but we must learn to trust that God's plan is better, even if it doesn't always make sense in the moment. His perspective is eternal, and His ways are higher than ours. When we surrender to His will, we experience a peace and fulfillment that cannot be found by pursuing our own plans apart from Him. One of the most important aspects of a purpose-driven life is recognizing that our purpose is not just about us. It is about serving others and bringing glory to God. Jesus told His disciples that the greatest commandment is to love God with all our hearts, minds, and souls, and to love our neighbors as ourselves. Our purpose is to serve God by loving and helping others. The world often tells us that success is about self-promotion and self-centered goals. But walking with God leads us to a different path, a life of service, humility, and sacrificial love. As we walk with God, we begin to understand that our purpose is tied to His kingdom and His work in the world. God's will is not only for us to find personal fulfillment, but for us to be a part of something much larger, the advancing of His kingdom on earth. Whether we are teachers, doctors, parents, artists, or business leaders, our work becomes a reflection of God's will when we dedicate it to Him and seek to use our skills and talents to serve others. This means that our purpose is not confined to what we do, but to the way in which we do it. God calls us to work with integrity, excellence, and love, no matter the field we are in. When we align our work with God's will, it becomes more than just a job. It becomes a way to serve others and bring glory to Him. At times, living a purpose-driven life may require sacrifice. God's will often calls us to step out of our comfort zones and do things that challenge us, or require us to give up something we hold dear. The Bible is full of stories of individuals who answered God's call to step into something greater, even when it was difficult or uncertain. Abraham was called to leave everything he knew and journey to a land he had never seen, trusting that God would show him the way. Moses was called to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, despite his fears and doubts. Jesus Himself modeled the ultimate act of sacrifice, giving up His life on the cross for the salvation of humanity. When we live with a sense of purpose driven by God's will, we must be willing to lay down our own desires for something greater. This doesn't mean that God doesn't care about our happiness or dreams. Rather, it means that He knows what is best for us and will lead us in a way that ultimately brings us true joy and fulfillment. The sacrifices we make in following His will are never in vain. They are a reflection of our trust in God and our desire to honor Him in all that we do. A purpose driven by God's will also means being patient and trusting in His timing. We often want to see immediate results, but God's plan unfolds in its own time. Sometimes we may not understand why things aren't happening as quickly as we would like, or why doors seem to be closing when we are doing everything we think is right. However, we must trust that God knows exactly what He is doing. His timing is perfect, and His plan for us is unfolding in a way that is best for us and for the world around us. Sometimes God's will for our lives doesn't look like what we expected or imagined. We may have certain aspirations, but His plan may be different. That's where trusting His guidance becomes so important. God knows us better than we know ourselves, and He has the ability to see the bigger picture. When we walk with Him, we learn to surrender our own desires and allow Him to shape our vision for the future. We may not always understand what He is doing, but we can trust that His plan is good and that He is working everything together for our good. Walking with God also means being open to His call, even when it leads us in unexpected directions. There may be times when God calls us to take a path that seems uncertain or risky, but when we know that our purpose is driven by His will, we can take those steps with confidence, knowing that He is leading us. The more we walk in obedience, the clearer His will becomes, and the more we are able to step into the purpose He has designed for us. Living a life driven by God's will is not about following a rigid set of rules or trying to achieve perfection. It's about surrendering our lives to Him and allowing Him to lead us in the direction He has chosen for us. As we walk with Him, we become more aligned with His heart and His desires, and our purpose becomes clearer. Walking with God means that we live with intentionality, seeking to honor Him in everything we do, and trusting that He will guide us to fulfill the purpose He has for our lives. When we live this way, we find true fulfillment, joy, and peace, knowing that we are living for something much greater than ourselves. When we walk with God, we experience His peace in ways that transcend our understanding. The world around us is filled with chaos, uncertainty, and challenges that often leave us feeling anxious, stressed, and overwhelmed. We are constantly bombarded with news of crises, personal struggles, and societal issues that can make us question where peace can be found. Yet when we walk with God, we come to know a peace that goes beyond these external circumstances. It is a peace that is anchored in the truth of His presence, promises, and sovereignty. In a world that places so much emphasis on external success and the pursuit of material possessions, we are often led to believe that peace comes from achieving certain goals or acquiring things. We are told that once we reach a certain level of success, financial security, or social status, we will finally experience peace. However, this kind of peace is fleeting and conditional. It is tied to the ever-changing circumstances of life, and when those circumstances shift or fall apart, so does our sense of peace. But the peace that comes from walking with God is not dependent on the external. It is a peace that is deeply rooted in the assurance that He is always with us, guiding us and protecting us. God's peace is described in the Bible as the peace that passes all understanding, Philippians 4:7. This peace is not something we can manufacture or achieve through our own efforts. It is a gift from God that transcends our ability to comprehend it. It is a peace that remains steadfast, even in the midst of storms, trials, and difficulties. When we walk with God, we come to understand that peace does not mean the absence of conflict or trouble. Rather, it means the presence of God in the midst of those challenges, providing comfort, assurance, and strength. One of the most powerful aspects of God's peace is its ability to calm our fears and anxieties. We live in a world where fear is often the driving force behind many of our decisions and actions. Fear of the future, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not being good enough. These fears can paralyze us and prevent us from fully living the life God has intended for us. But when we walk with God, we can bring our fears to Him, knowing that He is bigger than any fear we may face. The Bible tells us that perfect love casts out fear, 1 John 4:18. When we walk with God, we experience His perfect love, which drives out the fears that seek to control our hearts and minds. In His presence, fear cannot stand. God's peace also brings clarity in moments of confusion and uncertainty. Life is full of decisions, and many times we are faced with choices that feel overwhelming. The pressure to make the right choice can create stress and anxiety, and we may find ourselves caught up in a whirlwind of doubt. But when we walk with God, He promises to guide us. He will give us the wisdom and discernment we need to make decisions in alignment with His will. The peace of God is not only a comfort in times of hardship, but also a compass that leads us when we don't know which way to go. That is the heart of the kind of wisdom that leads us when we don't know which way to go. It is a quiet confidence that no matter what, God is with us and will direct our steps. Another key aspect of God's peace is that it helps us to release control. So much of our stress comes from trying to control things that are beyond our control. We worry about the future, about what others think, about what might happen if things don't go the way we plan. But when we walk with God, we learn to surrender our need for control and trust that He is in charge. This surrender doesn't mean that we become passive or indifferent to the events of our lives, but it means that we trust God's sovereignty. We recognize that He knows what is best, even when we don't understand the circumstances. When we release our grip on the things we cannot control, we allow God's peace to settle in our hearts. God's peace also helps to heal emotional wounds. Many of us carry emotional pain from past hurts, whether it's from relationships, failures, disappointments, or unresolved issues. These wounds can create a deep sense of unrest and anxiety in our hearts. But when we walk with God, we invite Him into our brokenness. He is a healer, and His peace has the power to soothe our emotional pain. In His presence, we find comfort and restoration. The peace of God does not just calm the external storms in our lives, it also brings healing to the internal struggles that affect our hearts and minds. When we allow God to heal our wounds, we experience a peace that is not just the absence of turmoil, but the presence of wholeness and restoration. Moreover, God's peace is a peace that transforms our relationships. When we experience His peace in our own hearts, it flows out into our relationships with others. We become more patient, kind, and forgiving because we understand that we have been recipients of God's grace and peace. His peace enables us to approach conflicts with a spirit of reconciliation and understanding, rather than with defensiveness or anger. When we walk with God, we become instruments of peace in a world that desperately needs it. Our ability to offer peace to others is rooted in the peace we have received from Him. The peace that comes from walking with God is also a peace that gives us hope for the future. Life can often feel uncertain, and the future can seem daunting, especially when we face challenges that threaten to overwhelm us. But when we walk with God, we can face the future with hope, knowing that He holds it in His hands. We don't have to worry about what lies ahead because we know that God is already there, preparing the way for us. His peace gives us the confidence to move forward, even when the path ahead seems unclear, because we trust that He will guide us, protect us, and provide for us along the way. In times of difficulty, when everything seems to be falling apart, the peace of God becomes a refuge, a place of rest and safety. It is a peace that steadies us when the world around us is shaking. It doesn't mean that our problems disappear, but it means that we have a deep assurance that God is in control and He will bring us through. His peace is not just a fleeting emotion. It is a constant presence that we can rely on. When we walk with God, we are never without peace because His peace is always with us, surrounding us and carrying us through whatever challenges we may face.